Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. Chapter 2. He became Jibril Farishta, but for 4 years he did not become a star, serving his apprenticeship in a succession of minor knockabout comic parts. He remained calm, unhurried, as though he could see the future, and his apparent lack of ambition made him something of an outsider in that most self-seeking of industries. He was thought to be stupid, or arrogant, or both, and throughout the 4 wilderness years he failed to kiss a single woman on the mouth. On screen, he played the fall guy, the idiot who loves the beauty and can't see that she wouldn't go for him in 1,000 years, the funny uncle, the poor relation, the village idiot, the servant, the incompetent crook, none of them the type of part that ever rates a love scene. Women kicked him, slapped him, teased him, laughed at him, but never, on celluloid, looked at him or sang to him or danced around him with cinematic love in their eyes. Off-screen, he lived alone in 2 empty rooms near the studios and tried to imagine what women looked like without clothes on. To get his mind off the subject of love and desire, he studied, becoming an omnivorous autodidact, devouring the metamorphic myths of Greece and Rome, the avatars of Jupiter, the boy who became a flower, the Spider-Woman, Circe, everything, and the theosophy of Annie Besant, and unified field theory, and the incident of the Satanic Verses in the early career of the Prophet, and the politics of Muhammad's harem after his return to Mecca in triumph, and the surrealism of the newspapers in which butterflies could fly into young girls' mouths asking to be consumed, and children were born with no faces, and young boys dreamed in impossible detail of earlier incarnations, for instance in a golden fortress filled with precious stones. He filled himself up with God knows what, but he could not deny in the small hours of his insomniac nights that he was full of something that had never been used, that he did not know how to begin to use, that is, love. In his dreams he was tormented by women of unbearable sweetness and beauty, so he preferred to stay awake and force himself to rehearse some part of his general knowledge in order to blot out the tragic feeling of being endowed with a larger than usual capacity for love, without a single person on earth to offer it to. His big break arrived with the coming of the theological movies. Once the formula of making films based on the Puranas and adding the usual mixture of songs, dances, funny uncles, etc., had paid off, every god in the pantheon got his or her chance to be a star. When D.W. Rama scheduled a production based on the story of Ganesh, none of the leading box office names of the time were willing to spend an entire movie concealed inside an elephant's head. Jibril jumped at the chance. That was his first hit, Ganpati Baba, and suddenly he was a superstar, but only with the trunk and ears on. After 6 movies playing the elephant-headed god, he was permitted to remove the thick, pendulous grey mask and put on instead a long, hairy tail in order to play Hanuman the Monkey King in a sequence of adventure movies that owed more to a certain cheap television series emanating from Hong Kong than it did to the Ramayana. This series proved so popular that monkey tails became de rigueur for the city's young bucks at the kind of parties frequented by convent girls known as firecrackers because of their readiness to go off with a bang. After Hanuman, there was no stopping Jibril, and his phenomenal success deepened his belief in a guardian angel, but it also led to a more regrettable development. I see that I must, after all, spill poor Raker's beans. Even before he replaced false head with fake tail, he had become irresistibly attractive to women. The seductions of his fame had grown so great that several of these young ladies asked him if he would keep the Ganesh mask on while they made love, but he refused out of respect for the dignity of the god. Owing to the innocence of his upbringing, he could not at that time differentiate between quantity and quality, and accordingly felt the need to make up for lost time. He had so many sexual partners that it was not uncommon for him to forget their names, even before they had left his room. Not only did he become a philanderer of the worst type, but he also learned the arts of dissimulation, because a man who plays gods must be above reproach. So skillfully did he conceal his life of scandal and debauch that his old patron, Babasaheb Matre, lying on his deathbed a decade after he sent a young Dabawala out into the world of illusion, black money and lust, begged him to get married to prove he was a man. "God's sake, mister," the Babasaheb pleaded, "when I told you back then to go and be a homo, I never thought you would take me seriously. There is a limit to respecting one's elders after all." Jibril threw up his hands and swore that he was no such disgraceful thing, and that when the right girl came along, he would of course undergo nuptials with a will. "What you waiting? Some goddess from heaven? Greta Garbo, Gracia Kali, who?" cried the old man, coughing blood, but Jibril left him with the enigma of a smile that allowed him to die without having his mind set entirely at rest. The avalanche of sex in which Jibril Farishta was trapped managed to bury his greatest talent so deep that it might easily have been lost forever. His talent, that is, for loving genuinely, deeply, and without holding back, the rare and delicate gift which he had never been able to employ. By the time of his illness, he had all but forgotten the anguish he used to experience owing to his longing for love, which had twisted and turned in him like a sorcerer's knife. Now, at the end of each gymnastic night, he slept easily and long, as if he had never been plagued by dream women, as if he had never hoped to lose his heart. "Your trouble," Reka Merchant told him when she materialized out of the clouds, "is everybody always forgave you. God knows why you always got let off. You got away with murder. Nobody ever held you responsible for what you did." He couldn't argue. "God's gift," she screamed at him. "God knows where you thought you were from, jumped up type from the gutter. God knows what diseases you brought." But that was what women did, he thought in those days. They were the vessels into which he could pour himself, and when he moved on, they would understand that it was his nature, and forgive. And it was true that nobody blamed him for leaving, for his 1,001 pieces of thoughtlessness. How many abortions, Reka demanded in the cloud hole? How many broken hearts? In all those years he was the beneficiary of the infinite generosity of women, but he was its victim too, because their forgiveness made possible the deepest and sweetest corruption of all, namely the idea that he was doing nothing wrong. Reka, she entered his life when he bought the penthouse at Everest Villas, and she offered, as a neighbor and businesswoman, to show him her carpets and antiques. Her husband was at a worldwide congress of ball bearings manufacturers in Gothenburg, Sweden, and in his absence she invited Jibril into her apartment of stone lattices from Jaisalmer and carved wooden handrails from Keralan palaces, and a stone Mughal chhatri or cupola turned into a whirlpool bath. While she poured him French champagne, she leaned against marbled walls and felt the cool veins of the stone against her back. When he sipped the champagne, she teased him. Surely gods should not partake of alcohol, and he answered with a line he had once read in an interview with the Aga Khan. "Oh, you know, this champagne is only for outward show. The moment it touches my lips it turns to water." After that it didn't take long for her to touch his lips and deliquesce into his arms. By the time her children returned from school with the ayah, she was immaculately dressed and coiffed, and sat with him in the drawing room, revealing the secrets of the carpet business, confessing that art silk stood for artificial, not artistic, telling him not to be fooled by her brochure, in which a rug was seductively described as being made of wool plucked from the throats of baby lambs, which means, you see, only low-grade wool, advertising, what to do, this is how it is. He did not love her, was not faithful to her, forgot her birthdays, failed to return her phone calls, turned up when it was most inconvenient, owing to the presence in her home of dinner guests from the world of the ball-bearing, and like everyone else, she forgave him. But her forgiveness was not the silent, mousy let-off he got from the others. Reka complained like crazy. She gave him hell. She bawled him out and cursed him for a useless lafanga and haramzada and Salah, and even, in extremis, for being guilty of the impossible feat of fucking the sister he did not have. She spared him nothing, accusing him of being a creature of surfaces, like a movie screen, and then she went ahead and forgave him anyway and allowed him to unhook her blouse. Jibril could not resist the operatic forgiveness of Reka Merchant, which was all the more moving on account of the flaw in her own position, her infidelity to the ball-bearing king, which Jibril forbore to mention, taking his verbal beatings like a man. So that whereas the pardons he got from the rest of his women left him cold, and he forgot them the moment they were uttered, he kept coming back to Reka, so that she could abuse him and then console him as only she knew how. Then he almost died. He was filming at Kanyakumari, standing on the very tip of Asia, taking part in a fight scene set at the point on Cape Comorin, where it seems that three oceans are truly smashing into one another. Three sets of waves rolled in from the west-east-south and collided in a mighty clapping of watery hands, just as Jibril took a punch on the jaw, perfect timing, and he passed out on the spot, falling backwards into tri-oceanic spume. He did not get up. To begin with, everybody blamed the giant English stuntman Eustace Brown who had delivered the punch. He protested vehemently. Was he not the same fellow who had performed opposite Chief Minister N.T. Rama Rao in his many theological movie roles? Had he not perfected the art of making the old man look good in combat without hurting him? Had he ever complained that NTR never pulled his punches, so that he, Eustace, invariably ended up black and blue, having been beaten stupid by a little old guy whom he could have eaten for breakfast on toast? And had he ever, even once, lost his temper? Well then, how could anyone think he would hurt the immortal Jibril? They fired him anyway, and the police put him in the lockup just in case. But it was not the punch that had flattened Jibril. After the star had been flown into Bombay's Breach Candy Hospital in an Air Force jet made available for the purpose, after exhaustive tests had come up with almost nothing, and while he lay unconscious, dying, with a blood count that had fallen from his normal 15 to a murderous 4.2, a hospital spokesman faced the national press on Breach Candy's wide white steps. "It is a freak mystery," he gave out. "Call it, if you so please, an act of God." Jibril Farishta had begun to hemorrhage all over his insides for no apparent reason, and was quite simply bleeding to death inside his skin. At the worst moment, the blood began to seep out through his rectum and penis, and it seemed that at any moment it might burst torrentially through his nose and ears and out of the corners of his eyes. For 7 days he bled and received transfusions and every clotting agent known to medical science, including a concentrated form of rat poison. and although the treatment resulted in a marginal improvement, the doctors gave him up for lost. The whole of India was at Jibril's bedside. His condition was the lead item on every radio bulletin. It was the subject of hourly news flashes on the national television network, and the crowd that gathered in Warden Road was so large that the police had to disperse it with lathi charges and tear gas, which they used even though every one of the 500,000 mourners was already tearful and wailing. The Prime Minister cancelled her appointments and flew to visit him. Her son, the airline pilot, sat in Farishta's bedroom holding the actor's hand. A mood of apprehension settled over the nation, because if God had unleashed such an act of retribution against his most celebrated incarnation, what did he have in store for the rest of the country? If Jibril died, could India be far behind? In the mosques and temples of the nation, packed congregations prayed, not only for the life of the dying actor, but for the future, for themselves. Who did not visit Jibril in hospital? Who never wrote, made no telephone call, dispatched no flowers, sent in no tiffins of delicious home cooking, while many lovers shamelessly sent him get-well cards and lamb pasandas, who, loving him most of all, kept herself to herself, unsuspected by her ball-bearing of a husband. Rekha Merchant placed iron around her heart and went through the motions of her daily life, playing with her children, chit-chatting with her husband, acting as his hostess when required, and never, not once, revealed the bleak devastation of her soul. He recovered. The recovery was as mysterious as the illness and as rapid. It too was called, by hospital, journalists, friends, an act of the Supreme. A national holiday was declared, fireworks were set off up and down the land. But when Jibril regained his strength, it became clear that he had changed, and to a startling degree, because he had lost his faith. On the day he was discharged from hospital, he went under police escort through the immense crowd that had gathered to celebrate its own deliverance, as well as his, climbed into his Mercedes and told the driver to give all the pursuing vehicles the slip, which took 7 hours and 51 minutes. And by the end of the maneuver, he had worked out what had to be done. He got out of the limousine at the Taj Hotel, and without looking left or right, went directly into the great dining room with its buffet table groaning under the weight of forbidden foods. And he loaded his plate with all of it. The pork sausages from Wiltshire, and the cured York hams, and the rashers of bacon from God knows where, with the gammon steaks of his unbelief, and the pig's trotters of secularism. And then, standing there in the middle of the hall, while photographers popped up from nowhere, he began to eat as fast as possible, stuffing the dead pigs into his face so rapidly that bacon rashers hung out of the sides of his mouth. During his illness, he had spent every minute of consciousness calling upon God, every second of every minute. Ya Allah, whose servant lies bleeding, do not abandon me now after watching over me so long. Ya Allah, show me some sign, some small mark of your favor, that I may find in myself the strength to cure my ills. O God, most beneficent, most merciful, be with me in this my time of need, my most grievous need. Then it occurred to him that he was being punished, and for a time that made it possible to suffer the pain, but after a time he got angry. Enough, God, his unspoken words demanded. Why must I die when I have not killed? Are you vengeance or are you love? The anger with God carried him through another day, but then it faded, and in its place there came a terrible emptiness, an isolation, as he realized he was talking to thin air, that there was nobody there at all. And then he felt more foolish than ever in his life, and he began to plead into the emptiness, Ya Allah, just be there, damn it, just be. But he felt nothing. nothing, nothing, and then one day he found that he no longer needed there to be anything to feel. On that day of metamorphosis, the illness changed and his recovery began. And to prove to himself the non-existence of God, he now stood in the dining hall of the city's most famous hotel, with pigs falling out of his face. He looked up from his plate to find a woman watching him. Her hair was so fair that it was almost white, and her skin possessed the color and translucency of mountain ice. She laughed at him and turned away. "Don't you get it?" he shouted after her, spewing sausage fragments from the corners of his mouth. "No thunderbolt, that's the point." She came back to stand in front of him. "You're alive," she told him. "You got your life back, that's the point." He told Reka, "The moment she turned around and started walking back, I fell in love with her." Alleluia Cone, climber of mountains, vanquisher of Everest, blonde Yehudan, Ice Queen. Her challenge, change your life, or did you get it back for nothing? I couldn't resist. "You and your reincarnation junk," Reka cajoled him. "Such a nonsense head. You come out of hospital back through death's door, and it goes to your head, crazy boy. At once you must have some escapade thing, and there she is. Hey presto, the blonde mame. Don't think I don't know what you're like, Gibbo, so what now? You want me to forgive you or what?" "No need," he said. He left Reka's apartment. Its mistress wept, face down on the floor, and never entered it again. 3 days after he met her with his mouth full of unclean meat, Ali got into an aeroplane and left. 3 days out of time behind a "Do Not Disturb" sign, but in the end they agreed that the world was real. What was possible, and what was impossible was brief encounter, ships that pass, love in a transit lounge. After she left, Jibril rested, tried to shut his ears to her challenge, resolved to get his life back to normal. Just because he'd lost his belief, it didn't mean he couldn't do his job, and in spite of the scandal of the ham-eating photographs, the first scandal ever to attach itself to his name, he signed movie contracts and went back to work. And then, one morning, a wheelchair stood empty and he had gone. A bearded passenger, one Ismail Najmuddin, boarded Flight AI 420 to London. The 747 was named after one of the gardens of paradise, not Gulistan, but Bostan. "To be born again," Jibril Farishta said to Saladin Chamcha much later. "First you have to die. Me, I only half expired, but I did it on 2 occasions, hospital and plane, so it adds up, it counts. And now, Spoono, my friend, here I stand before you in proper London, Vilayet, regenerated, a new man with a new life. Spoono, is this not a bloody fine thing?" Why did he leave? Because of her, the challenge of her, the newness, the fierceness of the two of them together, the inexorability of an impossible thing that was insisting on its right to become. And, or maybe, because after he ate the pigs the retribution began. A nocturnal retribution. A punishment of dreams.